Welcome to the Creative Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Caldwell, and I'm so happy you're here. Each episode, I take some time to chat with fellow artists about life, faith, and the impact of the arts. Welcome to episode 47. Today, we're changing it up a little bit, and we're starting a special two-part series focused on bringing you practical tips and advice. My amazing parents, Bobby and Julia Dean, join me for this conversation today, and we'll finish out the conversation next week with episode 48. I personally know so many artists who have started their own small businesses or nonprofit organizations, and many who have that dream to start one someday. Aside from being my parents, Bobby and Julia Dean both have amazing expertise in the areas of business, nonprofit work, and fundraising. In part one of the series, we hear from my mom, Julia Dean, about the process of setting up a business. My mom is an attorney who specializes in the areas of estate planning, probate, guardianships, and civil appeals. She's helped many clients structure their businesses and help them make sure they're set up for success. In our conversation, she specifically helps explain what goes into creating an LLC and helps break down what, to me, can feel like an overwhelming topic. You can learn more about my mom and her law firm at juliadeanlaw.com. In the second part of the series, which will go live next Tuesday, my stepdad Bobby Dean shares tips for fundraising from his experience as a fundraiser for multiple nonprofit organizations. You'll definitely want to check out next week's episode for some practical advice on developing positive relationships with donors and growing your nonprofit. Even if you don't have a nonprofit, these tips and skills are super helpful. I hope these episodes help you in your journey as an artist and possibly a business owner and a leader. Enjoy part one of my conversation with Bobby and Julia Dean. Today is a very special episode of the podcast because I have my parents on the show. Welcome.
Yay.
Yay. So I've got my amazing mom, Julia Dean, as she's known in the legal world. Yay.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, for sure. And then my awesome stepdad, Bobby Dean.
Hey there.
Yay, he is awesome. We're so blessed.
Yes, for sure. So it's going to be a fun episode, a little bit different than the normal flow in the sense that it's a little bit more like practical tips and advice for those of us that are wanting to start either a business of some kind or a nonprofit and what that looks like. And then also I'll give a little background. So my mom is an attorney and she works specifically with estate planning, and I'll let her introduce more about that, but also with helping people set up, business organizations and getting all those kinds of documents in place. And then my dad is a fundraising kind of expert, I would say, fundraising, especially with nonprofit work. So he'll be able to speak to that a little bit later in the show. But first, maybe I'll give you guys a second to introduce yourselves because I probably didn't go in quite as much detail. But yeah, so Mom, do you want to start us off with a little bit of your background? And
Sure. Well, the best part about my background is that I'm your mom, and that's always
yay.
been the biggest joy and pleasure in my life, and so grateful and so proud of you.
Thanks.
So I was just thinking back over that, when did law kind of get in my thoughts even, as I was growing up, and even back as far as elementary school, it's like I wanted to be so many things that I had something for every hour of the day. And being an attorney was one of them, and a doctor and a singer, and, just all kinds of things.
So you were just like rotating
Missionary.
through.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it was kind of funny. But in high school, I really began to think more about law because I saw it as a way to help people and to connect some of the gifts that God had given me for speaking. I loved debate. I loved theater and also writing, and just kind of extensive thought and strategy. And so those kind of things came together. And in college, I was able to take one class. I was at the University of Washington with the law center there.
Oh, cool.
And that solidified it for me because it was very intimidating at first. They made you stand up to, talk about the cases. It's called recite. And you had to try to put it all together. And the first time I was doing that, he was just drilling me with all kinds of questions. And at one point, it just clicked for me and I knew what he was getting at. And I did this strategy kind of thing. And he said, "You've got it. You're the first one to have, understood this in my class." And I was in the class with other law students too. So at that point, I realized, okay, God was confirming that maybe that's the direction I needed to go. And so I've never changed my mind. That's always what I've been wanting to do. Kind of went through a lot of variations of what that would look like. I started out in commercial litigation, dealing with large cases at large law firms, and then went into more civil appellate work, which was kind of like a lawyer's lawyer. We were taking a case that some other lawyer had tried at the trial court level, and then doing briefing and strategies and writing, and then the oral argument to the Court of Appeals and to the Supreme Court, whether in Texas or federal courts. And I love that too.
I always think it's funny, the idea of the word brief, because they're definitely not brief.
It's totally not a brief. Our briefs are like 50 pages.
Exactly. I remember I've had the honor of getting to proofread some of the briefs. And they're not very brief, but they are really cool.
Yes. And you were a great proofreader. You were wonderful. So thank you, because it was difficult. And I knew if you could understand it and follow my argument that we were good, because you had no legal background or training, but you were excellent in, English and writing and communicating. And so that just became a good stamp of approval on the brief when you look it over. So thank you.
Of course. That's fun.
So over time, I realized I was getting further and further away from helping people, which was the whole reason I really wanted to be in law. And so I decided to go out on my own. And because of my wonderful husband, Bobby, giving me the courage to do that, and the salary to get us through a few years where you're not making any money, I went out on my own. And I thought, what do I really want to do now that I've had a chance to look at, trial work and other things? I realized trial work ate me up inside. I'd go to sleep thinking about it. What should I have said? What should I have done? And I really instead wanted to proactively help people or come alongside and help them get through a difficult time. So that's when I decided, and I had dealt in this area a little bit, but not much, I would delve into estate planning, because you're proactively helping people get where they need to go through their wills and their trust, and disability planning and some business planning that kind of flowed into that, because we deal with a lot of small business owners. And I'm working with people all the time, and I love that. And so I feel like I'm in my sweet spot. And then the other areas just kind of naturally came from that. So I also do probate, trust administration, guardianships, and special needs trust. And I still do a little bit of civil appellate law, because I have some trial attorneys that still want me to do it, but I pretty much ramped that down now. So I can just focus on the area where I feel like God has really created me for.
Yeah. Some people say something like, we each kind of have a superpower or something like that. I don't know if that's the exact word they use, but I feel like your superpower is kind of that, like, connecting with people and, that client relationship, and being able to help people feel comfortable to share about their experiences and, their money, which is a hard thing to talk about, their estate planning and stuff like that. So I think you're definitely in your sweet spot, like you said.
I love to hear that, because then, okay, God's giving another stamp of approval on where you're heading and where you're going and where I'm investing my life. And so I love that. Now I see that as a ministry instead of just work. I'm really helping people and, just coming alongside with excellent work, but helping them through a difficult time, and with compassion and empathy. And that's who I am. That's who God created me to be, not to be in the middle of the contest in a courtroom.
Makes sense for sure. Yeah. And then Dad, do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your background with fundraising?
Sure. Well, whenever I started out my working career, I was in the data processing area. So I did systems work. I wrote software. I was an IBM business agent selling IBM mid-range systems. This was pre-personal computer days.
Yeah. So the big, like, room size computers.
Yeah. The ones that I worked on mostly were kind of freestanding, but still took up a good chunk of a room. But, I started out working on computers at a place called Bell Helicopter.
Oh, yeah.
I was in their operations division for a while and did their computer operations, which was a lot of fun. And that was a giant size room worth of computer. So somewhere along the line, in college, I wanted to be a CPA. And during my intermediate accounting class, it really ate my lunch. And I went in one time to the professor. It was probably about November of the fall semester. And I wasn't doing great. I think I was holding a very low C. And I said, I really need some extra help. What can I do to, do better in this class? And he looked at me and he said, have you thought about a different major?
Oh,
So that's kind of whenever I went into the business and information technology side of things. And so after Bell Helicopter, I went to a small independent oil and gas company as their systems manager. So I ran their computer for them. I wrote some software. They had a blowout prevention simulator platform that I wrote the software for.
Oh, cool.
And so that was a lot of fun. And then the mid 80s hit with the oil and gas fallout, and lost my job there. So I stayed in systems work. I went to a lumber company, did computer work for them for a long time. About 5 years later, I started my own business, writing software and doing computer sales and installation. Well, one of my clients was a nonprofit called Cal Farley's Boys Ranch.
Yeah.
And Cal Farley's asked me to write software for their fundraising group, which I did. And about 6 years later, of course, the job was done many years before that, but about 6 years later, they had reached out to me and wanted to know if I was interested in full-time work with Cal Farley's. And we negotiated that, and I went to work for Cal Farley's as both their systems manager and their fundraising manager. And I had no idea really outside of the software side what fundraising was all about. So this was 1992.
Okay.
And a few years later, my CEO, who was brand new CEO to the organization, called me in his office and he said, I don't want anybody doing two jobs, so I want you to pick one. And I said, well, okay, that sounds reasonable. Can I, have the night to pray about it? And he said, no, I want you to make a decision now.
Nope.
And so
No
this guy,
pressure.
he was a freshly retired brigadier general. And so,
Okay.
this was his style.
Uh-huh.
And so I chose at that time to do fundraising because, I thought, I know a lot about computers, but I don't know that much about fundraising. So I'm really looking for a challenge. The funny thing is about technology is, 2 years into my fundraising leadership role, I couldn't even remember how to turn on a computer almost. And it just passes you by so fast. And this was the advent of personal computers and personal computer networking, and things were changing dramatically. And we're moving away from smaller, room-sized computers like I was used to working on. And so that was the start of my fundraising career. And I haven't looked back since. I've enjoyed every bit of it, from working with annual fund or direct marketing to planned giving, which is giving through basically non-cash assets. And then after about 15 years in this position, your mom and I met, and we got engaged soon after. And I felt like God was wanting me to move to Sugar Land, Texas from Amarillo. So that was a big change for me. I stayed with Cal Farley's for a couple of years after I moved down here, but that became really too much. And it was a change that was good to make to find a local company to work for. So I went to work for Houston Grand Opera.
Yeah.
I did major gift and planned giving work for them for about 5 years. And then a position came open at MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I thought this was more in line with my heart, my passion for raising funds to really help, people who needed it in a way that it was really life or death.
Yeah.
And, I had some patrons at the opera that would say, what good is life without the arts? And I understand that, but you need to have life. And so, that's kind of where my passion is. So I've been at MD Anderson for 10 years now.
Wow, that's true. It's kind of hard to believe it's been 10 years.
So this is just finishing up my 29th year in fundraising.
Oh, nice.
So about to start 30 years.
That's so cool. Yeah. And I have to say, when you were at Houston Grand Opera, that was kind of fun, though, because we got to go to some shows and, go
sit in the founder's box.
That was
Yeah,
cool.
there was a lot of great perks.
Yeah, it was a fun season for sure. But It is really nice seeing you in your element at MD Anderson as well. And kind of like I was saying for Mom, but your superpower, I feel like, is also kind of the relational aspect as well, and like connecting with people and just building those relationships with donors and things like that. So
right.
Super cool. Yay. Well, we'll definitely come back around to you to talk some more about, fundraising and what that looks like in the nonprofit world. But first, I'm going to switch back over to Mom and talk about a little bit more about kind of setting up a business entity and what that looks like. And I know for myself personally, getting into this podcast, I was thinking, well, I want to do this, but I also want to do it in a way that's like the right way, so to speak. So, have the right setup and structure and all of that. And fortunately, I happen to have a mom who's like an expert in all of these things. So, so I was able to just, be hanging out over dinner and ask, so how does an LLC work, and what goes into this and everything. And so I wanted to be able to kind of share that with all of our listeners, and just some of the basics behind an LLC in particular, and any other, structures that you might want to talk about, and basically just allow people to have that foundation and then kind of know what next steps to take if they're interested in starting something like a podcast, or maybe like a side business selling things on Etsy, or starting a local studio. Just so many different people that I know of that are interested in either getting something off the ground or are already doing something and maybe need to make it a little bit more official and structured appropriately, I guess. So
yeah, it was very astute of you to even know that you should have something in place to protect you. And so part of being good stewards of our finances and our life, which all of us as Christians really want to be, is to think proactively in terms of what we need to do for business or for our own life, whether that's our estate plan or whatever, or disability plan. So the business planning side of things is so important. So if we have a corporate structure around what we're doing, like your podcast or a dance studio or art studio, or your publishing of a book or whatever, any kind of business, we're putting kind of a protection, a liability protection around that company. Why do we want to do that? Because if something happened in the business, say someone is injured at your dance studio and then they sue your dance studio, we don't want it to affect you personally and your family so that you go bankrupt as well. So if we can insulate that liability to within that corporate structure, if something happens there and they can't get out to your personal assets, we are being a good steward of and protecting ourselves and our family as well as our business. So they can go after the business if something happens there and any insurance you have in the business, but they can't go after everything else. And then also, if you had, say you injured someone in a car accident and it went beyond your auto insurance, or if you had umbrella insurance beyond that too, they're going to start looking for all of your assets that are non-exempt that they can go after. So, our home in Texas is protected, and usually our retirement accounts, except from the IRS or child support. But most of our other assets are not protected. And that includes your business if it's not in a corporate structure.
Okay.
So if we have a corporate structure and someone's out here, they can't get through to what's in your business. So you're protecting your business as well. And you may be employing people. So you're protecting your team, so, and also the people who benefit from either your ministry or the students at the dance studio, from the liability from something else that's happening to you personally.
Right.
So most structures that are limited liability structures, there's different kinds of ways to limit that liability. And so we're limiting to what's inside there, inside your business. So if you own the business building inside it and the business itself, they could go after the building too. But usually we want to segregate that and put the business in a separate corporate entity. So they can't go after the building itself if they go after your business, but they can't come after your personal stuff. So we're just insulating liability to your business and protecting it from your personal issues out here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why we put corporate structures in place in the first place.
Cool. That's awesome. So, just from your experience, what do you think is the most helpful corporate structure for someone like me that's kind of a artist, kind of starting out doing some sort of, I don't know what to call it, but like a little project basically, and, starting just
Right.
beginnings of a business maybe.
Absolutely. So, I'm going to give you some general advice. And of course, I'm advising everyone to go talk to an attorney and talk about your specific situation, because there's always exception to every rule.
Mhm.
But generally, it's going to be that LLC structure, a limited liability corporation. That LLC then is the easiest corporate structure that is out there. I love it because as far as income and everything else, it kind of flows through to you and it's easy. It's just a schedule on the tax return. It's easy tax wise. You still get that limited liability, and maintaining it is easier. And we don't have as many rules around it as we do some of our other corporate structures. So I would say for probably 90 plus people that are out there listening that may be thinking of starting a business, an LLC is a great structure for that.
Mhm.
Now, there are other kinds of structures, for example, S corporation, called S Corp for short, and that provides some additional tax benefits, and a reason why maybe tax-wise we want to head into that kind of structure if we're making a little more money to minimize the taxes that we have to pay. But it has a lot more restrictions on it. And so we're limited, and we don't want to do things that blow that S Corp election. So a great combination of the two is we can start out as an LLC, and as things progress and maybe you're making more money and things are a little bit more complex tax-wise with your attorney and CPA, making the choice to be taxed as an S Corp, but still maintain the LLC structure, which gives you the benefit of both worlds, better tax benefits later when you might need them. So that's something to think about in the future. And then the other main kind of corporate entity, there's others, but the main kind is a C Corp. And that's the kind that you hear about that are public corporations, on the stock exchange, almost all C Corps, but they have double taxation. They're taxed at the corporate level and then they're taxed at the individual level. Whereas an LLC or an S Corp, you just get taxed individually and you're not taxed at the corporate level and the LLC. The IRS just sees that money flowing through to you tax-wise, but you still get the corporate limited liability.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that, because I know it's a little confusing. And at least for myself, it was a little bit daunting to even kind of venture into these waters. So it was helpful to have the breakdown and kind of the explanation of, okay, this is why this is the best fit for you. But like you said, it really depends on the person and the situation. So I'll reiterate that you should definitely talk to a professional and, figure out what the best situation is or structure is for you. But I guess let's dive into LLCs a little more, because I feel like most people are probably in a similar boat as me. So when would someone need an LLC?
I think anytime you're doing a business, you want to think about an LLC. Now, you can operate as a sole proprietor. There's no limited liability structure around that. And if all you're doing is just getting income because you're teaching at a dance studio, you probably don't need that structure.
Right. Is it basically like contract work, essentially?
Yeah, exactly. But if you're opening a studio, if you have any employees, if you're holding some of that income and maybe utilizing it for other things that you're purchasing for your business, then I would recommend an LLC. And because it's so easy, if you have any question about whether you should do one or the other, I would recommend doing the LLC because of the limited liability.
So what all goes into setting up an LLC?
So we begin by filling out the paperwork for this Secretary of State here, the Texas Secretary of State. And we state the structure of your LLC. So who are the owners? It could be just you, maybe it's 2 people, maybe it's 10 people, and what the ownership is on all of them. And we also have to choose a registered agent. So usually that's someone who's one of the owners, or if you're a sole owner, the sole owner. And this is someone who gets served the corporate paperwork. So if there's any legal notices that have to go out, or the Secretary of State needs to communicate with you, this is the person that they're going to serve. And so if that changes, it needs to be updated with the Texas Secretary of State. There are corporate entities that's all they do. And for about usually $100 a year or so, you can have them served instead of you if you don't want your address on the paperwork with the Secretary of State.
Right. Gotcha. So you get the paperwork going.
Right.
And then I remember doing an EIN number.
Correct.
Like applying for an EIN number.
So that comes a little later. So we also need to do some articles of incorporation. And so we'll prepare that. Like if someone came to me, we would prepare that paperwork for them and how the structure would be. And then once for us, I'm going to talk about the Texas Secretary of State since that's what I work with. Once the Texas Secretary of State approves your name, so they'll do a name search. And I would always have a second or third one just in case your name is taken. They will issue just a letter showing you your number, just a number from the Texas Secretary of State. That's not your tax ID number or EIN. That's something different. And that you have authority and ability to operate as that business. So then you sign off on your paperwork. You sign, that you're the president of it and the treasurer or whatever. So if you're the only one, you can be all those roles: president, secretary, treasurer, and where you're going to open your bank account. Now, before you can open your bank account, that's where we need that EIN number or tax ID number. And EIN stands for employee identification number, or employer, identification number, or your tax ID number, TIN. Same thing. It's just we submit paperwork or we go online and we put in all the information concerning your LLC. And usually right away, we'll get from the IRS a tax ID number or EIN. And so that's what we can take along with your corporate paperwork and what the Texas Secretary of State gave you to the bank to open that business account. Mm-hmm. Now, that business account is really important because you want everything to keep that limited liability going. We need to make sure that we're treating it like a business. We're not commingling anything personally with what's in your business. So we want to keep everything that flows through your business in a separate bank account. And so if something's coming out to you, you can make a draw for like your salary or do a salary, either one. Mm-hmm. But it's a separate transaction that all flows through your business bank account. And that's how if someone sued you, they're going to say, well, it was really one and the same. You're just one person. This is your business. But really, we're going to show, no, you opened it. You're operating exactly like a business. You have all the business paperwork. You have your tax ID number. You have your bank account. Everything's flowing through that.
Yeah. That helps keep everything separated.
Right. Because what we don't want them to do is what we call pierce the corporate veil. And that's when someone sues you and they say, well, really, it's the same thing. We call it piercing the corporate veil. And they can get to all your personal assets if they're suing your business, or vice versa. If they're suing you personally, they can get to your business assets. So the other thing that's really, really important to maintain your business liability, limited liability, is to make sure that you're doing your corporate books every year. So your annual minutes you need to be doing. And I know it seems a little ridiculous if it's just you, me, and I, doing the paperwork, but it's so important. Or you and a spouse, that you're both saying, okay, we met on this, or I, for my own business.
Met with myself.
Yes, that I met with myself and this is what we discussed, or there was no new business and sign off on it every year. Let's say you decide to do something bigger during the year. Then we document what's called a resolution. And again, it's kind of like a mid-year meeting, but we're resolving to do certain things. Like maybe we bought a building and now we're going to be renovating it. So we're agreeing that we're going to do this renovation and maybe hire this contractor to do it. So we're just documenting that and signing off on that.
Okay, cool. So really the main things that help protect that limited liability are, having a separate bank account or separate bank accounts, checking, savings, that kind of thing. And then maintaining corporate books, meeting minutes. Okay. And like an annual meeting.
Exactly.
Once a year. Okay.
Not commingling anything.
Things. Right. Okay.
Right.
Nice. So that's definitely helpful. It's just kind of the nuts and bolts of how to maintain an LLC. And any other just like things that you want to share about LLC before we move on to more nonprofit side of things?
I think it's really an easy structure once you get it in place. So I wouldn't be at all taken aback by it. But I know when you're starting a business, everything seems so overwhelming at first.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is really good to get some legal advice as well as some advice from a CPA. But once you've got it in place, it's very easy to maintain and get going on that. So there was one other requirement I did want to mention is that in Texas, now this may be different in other states or maybe other requirements. All we need to do is file a Texas franchise return. It's a Texas franchise tax return due middle of May. And every year we file that. And most of the time it's a zero amount due on that tax return. Because in Texas, you'd have to make over $1 million for you to pay any tax on it. But you file that to just maintain your corporate validity with the Texas Secretary of State. Otherwise, there are penalties if you don't do that.
Right. That's actually a really good reminder that I need to do that like now.
Right. Exactly. It is May now.
It is April. I feel like March and April kind of just flew by. So yeah, thank you for saying that. Perfect.
You're welcome. It's just one page. It's really easy.
Yes. Okay, cool. So I'll, maybe I'll give a little update next week if I get that done.
Sounds good.
Really not bad. Well, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing about LLCs and just, a little bit of the basics to help everyone hopefully not feel quite as overwhelmed by the idea and, know that it's okay. And it's good, there's people out there that can help us with all the steps along the way. So
absolutely.
Super grateful my mom was able to come on the show and share more about LLCs and the different pros and cons of business organizations. I hope you learned something new and that it benefits you wherever you happen to be in your journey. Be sure to listen next week as we finish out our conversation talking about nonprofit work and fundraising and all sorts of practical tips that go along with that. You can find all the links, the full show notes, and additional resources on our website, creativeimpactpodcast.com. I also encourage you to check out my mom's website at juliadeanlaw.com. Are you enjoying the podcast? You can help support the show by joining our Patreon community. As a supporter of the podcast, you get access to extra content that's only available for patrons. And I want to give a huge shout out to my parents for recently becoming VIP patrons of the podcast. Thank y'all so much for your support. If you've just started listening to the podcast or you've been listening for a while but haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button and you'll be the first to receive new episodes every single Tuesday. Thank you so much for listening to the Creative Impact Podcast. The music for the show was produced by Michael Cash. Share the show with a friend, check out our Patreon community at the link on our website, and I'll see you next week for part 2 of my conversation with Bobby and Julia Dean.